So in this segment, we're going to be talking about some of the comments from Politics Live and Lisa Nandy, who's a shadow minister, and the stuff she's saying does not fill me with confidence about Labour. She's all over the shop, and she makes some really xenophobic comments, in my opinion, which Labour's stance on immigration and freedom of movement is really, really awful. I'll be honest, some of the language that they use. So we'll cut to the clips. There's quite a bit to talk about from this episode. I watched about just over half of it. It's very cringe. But yeah.
Out a return to freedom of movement in EU. Now, this follows on from comments made by the Labour leader to the Mail on Sunday, in which he rules out a Swiss-style deal. You remember that was a headline, I think, from a week or two ago.
And of course, you know, the EU won't give us a Swiss-style deal because it's the way the Swiss deal is set up is a pain, and it causes both sides endless problems. So that deal was never on the table. But the point is, Starmer rallying against freedom of movement despite being a big supporter of it a couple of years ago.
With the EU, and says freedom of movement is a red line for me. Why is he saying that, Lisa?
Well, because the situation has changed, and in order to do a much closer deal with the European Union...
I think the first question is, what situation has changed? You could argue that Brexit happened, but I think Starmer came in after, or towards the end of Johnson getting us out of the EU. So for them to argue the situation's changed, I don't really get it.
And accept freedom of movement, we'd have to re-enter negotiations with the EU. I don't think there's anybody in the EU who wants to do that. When I was serving as Shadow Foreign Secretary under Keir for 2 years, I didn't meet a single person in Europe who would want to entertain that. And actually, I don't think most people in this country want to see us embroiled in more internal division. We've had a decade of division.
With the internal divisions point, I get it, but at some point, we're gonna have to have this conversation again. Maybe it's not during the next Parliament, but it's going to have to happen again because at the end of the day, the UK's economy is stuck. We are struggling on multiple different areas. Our economy is not doing great. And for Keir Starmer to really boost the economy, to prove why people should vote for Labour, he's going to have to do something pretty radical to get the economy moving again, because it's not looking great. We are the only G7 member from, I think it's Q4 2019 to Q3 of this year, who are having negative growth. So clearly something is wrong. You can fix up the Tories' mistakes and make better decisions here, but at the end of the day, we have cut ourselves off from our biggest trading partner, and that's causing massive impacts. And that will impact us on our EU trade, but also our non-EU trade. As productivity goes down, amongst other things, it means we're going to make less to export. So clearly Labour have to have a conversation with themselves here. As kind of London negotiates with itself, kind of the Tories, I think Labour are having a similar problem. And, she goes on to make some really bad arguments as well. So let's get to that.
In this country, we've got to move forwards. We could cooperate much more closely with the European Union without having to reopen questions about Britain's membership of the European Union and freedom of movement and other divisive issues. And that's what I think we should concentrate on.
It's interesting that you say things have changed, because it was during his leadership campaign. That was only in 2020, and he actually pledged to defend free movement as we left the EU. I mean, he was pushing for freedom of movement as part of the free trade deal negotiations that were being carried out by Boris Johnson. I mean, this is completely incompatible with what he's saying now.
But I think what we all came to realise during that leadership contest, and I was in it as well, is because we spent a lot of time debating these issues with the electorate.
And let's not forget, you lost. Starmer was pushing a lot of left-wing ideals, and he was also pushing, in support of freedom of movement. And let's not forget who's the one that won it. It wasn't you, pal, on your ideas and your kind of slightly Brexity ideology. It was Starmer who won on I think a more pro-EU, pro-worker basis. So it's a bit ironic. You're kind of talking about things have changed and blah blah blah, when the fact is, you lost based on your ideals, which weren't as pro-EU as Starmer's. The Labour base is very pro-Europe compared to Keir Starmer and the front bench.
And together. And what we came to realise is this country is desperate for politicians to stop fighting the battles of the past and rehearsing old arguments and start to think about how we're going to move this country forwards. I was in favour of free movement. I am still in favour of free movement. If
here we go,
you ally it with a strong policy of skilling up young people in this country. The problem with free movement in places like Wigan
this is where it gets bad.
Wasn't that we had nurses and doctors coming to work in our hospital. We were proud of that and we were grateful to them. It was that young people only a few streets away were looking at those jobs and thinking, I might as well try and go to the moon as to get those jobs. Because we've stripped away all of the help.
But isn't there a problem
that would get them there?
But isn't there?
But that's the problem, isn't it? It's not the fact that young people can say, well, that I could have those jobs. It's the fact that there was no support for them to get there. So it wasn't the fault of the EU workers, because this is something someone actually, when I discussed it with someone, I realised how much worse her argument is. It's the point of, you can argue that if young people had enough support and enough help, they would be able to, become things like nurses and doctors, etc. That's not a problem. I don't have any issue with that argument. But the issue is that they never had a chance to begin with, because they don't have the support needed, evidently, to get there in Wigan. Okay, so the EU workers filling those spots of nurses and GPs haven't taken away the jobs from anyone in Wigan that were impacted by Tory cuts, because they never had a shot to begin with. If you guys get what I'm saying here. And if you try and argue that, we didn't train our own because we replaced them with EU workers, there's a chronic shortage of nurses and doctors anyways within the UK. So, and we had that before freedom of movement ended in the UK by the Tories. So to argue that, we just kind of replaced them with EU workers, there weren't enough EU workers to kind of fill up the shortages we did have. So we had to train our own workers anyways, but the Tories chose not to, because they don't care about the EU, if that makes sense. So the arguments that she makes here make fundamentally no sense and are incredibly xenophobic, talking about how EU workers have taken away chances from British kids. Incredibly xenophobic. And, I saw this kind of that kind of clip on Twitter out of context, and when I've seen the full context, it's so much worse. It's so much worse, because she's arguing, she's basically saying these kids never had a shot, so but despite that, the EU workers have taken their place from them. I genuinely don't get the argument. It's bizarre, I'll be honest with you.
Is there a problem with that? You say you are in favour of freedom of movement.
If you ally it with a policy that fills labour shortages in this country, first and foremost, by skilling up young people to get those jobs, and we haven't done it. We haven't.
And you would think, she's very passionate about this point. I've read Labour's kind of points on this. They updated on the 27th of September, so not too long ago. They talk about, the turn the Tories failed apprenticeship levy into a growth and skills levy. Okay, that's fine. Better align skills policy with regional economic policy, establish a new expert body, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry if you can hear my cat. Labour will give employers new flexibility to invest in the world-class training they need, but surely Labour should be looking at investing more in things like colleges and schools to give people, not just academic skills, but also vocational skills, which we have massive shortages of in the UK. Surely that's what the government should be doing, instead of relying on businesses who don't evidently want to train people because of cost and other reasons. Surely the government should be filling in the skills need, just like they do for sort of academic jobs and things like that. When we're talking academics here, we're not talking university PhDs, etc. We're talking more like just classic essays and things like that. They don't teach you vocational skills, trade skills in the UK, not properly. It's looked down upon, it's sneered on until you actually need stuff doing, that requires those trade skills. So her arguments are ridiculous, because surely she should be on the front line of pushing Labour to have a great policy towards, training in skills. But, this page is a joke, an absolute joke, I'll be honest with you. They don't have much in terms of ideas here. So her arguments don't make sense, because she should be on the front lines here talking about how they're going to make reforms, or at least the shadow education minister should be here talking about how they're going to make reforms. Yet they're very silent. Where are they at? Ridiculous.
Done it for over a decade. The nursing bursary's gone. The education maintenance allowance.
The nurses bursary's back. From what I've read, I had it on a search somewhere here, but it's back. The Tories reinstated after getting rid of it. So, to argue about the nurses bursary now makes no sense.
Has gone. Tuition fees have gone up. The grants have gone.
And again, she makes the point that the fees have gone up. That's true. It's about 9,250. Labour in 2015 under Ed Miliband, when I think she was in the shadow cabinet, pushed for the fees to be £6,000. So Labour, haven't actually been that great on things like tuition fees. Labour had a lot more support for kids wanting to stay in education, which was great. But, which of these ideals are, Keir Starmer's brand of Labour going to bring back? Yes, I get we're not an election, but for you to make these arguments and have nothing doesn't fill me with confidence, unfortunately.
That whole architecture that would have got working class young people from my constituency there has gone.
And, even with all of these things that Labour had, right, under Tony Blair, sorry I keep cutting in here, we still needed freedom of movement to push the economy. We still needed people to come in to do jobs, because the amount of vacancies we had, and it really did help push the economy under New Labour and really push growth here. So, even if you do have these great ideas, which I think New Labour had to an extent, it's still not enough to push a developed country forward. It just isn't. You need immigration.
And it's not acceptable to say we'll just fill those shortages by bringing people in from overseas and ignoring young people who want to make a contribution to their own country.
Craig?
Well, we're going to skip a bit to 1343. That was the next bit worth discussing, which is this guy over here. He's, I don't know much about him, but he's pretty interesting.
Years ago at the time, and now it's a red line, freedom of movement.
Well, I think there are two different things. One is he was facing the Labour Party membership, who he knew were very liberal on this, and he said one thing, and then he looked at the electorate and went, actually, I think I need to posture over here, and that's what explains the change. Look, it's a dishonest thing, let's be frank about it. I'm not going to pull my punches. He said we will defend free movement as we leave the EU. The minute he became leader, there was a chance to amend the bill going through Parliament. He didn't amend it to say we will defend free movement as we leave.
And what he did was, I agree with Andrew Fisher here, that the whole issue is he did a pivot. I don't know if there are any Americans advising him, but during the primaries you place your base, and then during the midterms, during the actual elections, you pivot, and that's exactly what Keir Starmer did. Classic American pivot.
So it's just dishonest. And I think, Lisa stood in that campaign, Rebecca Long-Bailey stood in that campaign. Disagree with them or agree with them, they were honest about what they stood for. And I think it's unfortunate that actually, if you look at most of the pledges he stood on in that campaign, he's now reneged on them entirely. But his speech at the CPI last week, where he did say we need to wean the country off immigration, it's delusional. We're not going to wean the country off immigration because we need it. We need net migration.
Well, those figures certainly show that we've
got an ageing population. We've got massive shortages of nurses. We've got massive shortages of care workers. If you train up lots of British people to do those jobs, you're taking them out of the labour market and putting them somewhere else. So
that's also a good point. If we have a quick look at UK unemployment numbers, there were approximately 1.22 million unemployed people in the United Kingdom in the 3 months of September 2022. If we look at the vacancies, you see the number of job vacancies in June to August was about 1.266 million, right? So you can see here the numbers in terms of record vacancies is slightly higher than the amount of unemployed people. So even if you use the Tory arguments of just get the unemployed people into jobs, it's still not enough people. The other problem you have is geography, which Brexiteers don't understand much about, which if you have someone who's unemployed in Sunderland, offering them a job in London isn't very helpful because of geography. The other problem is they might not have the relevant skills to do it. Yes, I get Lisa and Andy's point of giving people, helping people to get skills, etc. But it's not going to be enough. That's the problem, because we are having record vacancies. The issue is the amount of people. And so her arguments make no sense. And I think her arguments are steeped in UKIP xenophobia, I'll be honest. Or at least the argument she's using, she might not be, but the words she's saying are.
We're going to backfill the jobs. We have shortages in this country. We need them filled. Skills is part of it, but we're still going to need high net migration. And actually, over half of that total is students who we want to come in and study at our universities.
And there is a debate about whether they should be included in the figures. But are you saying you're relaxed about 500,000 figure in terms of net migration?
Depending on how it breaks down, yes, of course.
Well, every year?
Yes, because if universities can attract 200,000, 300,000 students every year, that's fine and good on them. That's good. As long as there are still places for British kids to go to university, and there seem to be, then that's fine.
And I agree with him on that point. There seems to be an issue. Obviously, housing. There are massive housing problems amongst other things, but that's something where you need a skilled labour force in order to build houses. There are many different layers to building houses and housing estates. So we are short on those people. Go figure. That's one of the reasons why house building has slowed down so much in this country. So some of these arguments, this is a person who actually makes sense. I want to skip a bit more because there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about, which is around here.
What do you say about Andrew Fisher calling Keir Starmer dishonest on this?
Well, look,
This argument she gives here is genuinely just groundbreakingly stupid.
Rightly says I was in that leadership contest. I think we all put forward the platform that we believed in and we stood on that. But I also think that Keir is the sort of politician who listens.
So she's arguing that he's arguing Keir Starmer's dishonest, okay? She's arguing Keir Starmer listens, okay?
I didn't know him that well before we went into the leadership contest. I knew him a bit, but I hadn't been on the front bench for some time. But
I don't need a life story here, Chief.
Over the last few years. And one of the things that is a feature of this shadow cabinet is that he's put in some very strong-minded people, some very strong women into some of the top jobs. And when they put forward views, he listens and he will change his mind. And I think that is a positive thing in a politician.
So you're saying the reason why Keir Starmer is coming out with these nonsensical arguments is because he put in a load of strong women and he's listening to them? That is not the argument I'd be using here, Chief. you're blaming women for the reason why Keir Starmer lied to the Labour membership. Like, what the hell? Like, he's asked. Let's go back. Let's go back to the actual question. Let's go back, because we've heard our answer. It's about something to do with strong women. Okay, being the reason. But if we go back, let's listen to the question quickly. It's around about here somewhere.
Come out so recently.
What do you say about Andrew Fisher calling Keir Starmer dishonest on this?
Well,
So he called Keir Starmer dishonest. So her answer is Keir Starmer put in a load of women, and Keir Starmer listens to these women, and that's a great thing. What is wrong with these people, honestly? I mean, what the hell? What kind of answer is that? Like, that's a joke. I think the next bit I want to talk about was about 22, 24. But I mean, what the hell kind of answer is that? What?
being in opposition is a very cushy gig because you can point to the chaos and say, look what happened, we can do better. But as you get closer to the election, I think people do want to hear more in the way of specifics.
In terms
And we are going to be approaching an election soon, and I would like to hear about specifics, yes.
Something more substantial than we're going to hire some agents to crack down on the gangs. Or
It's right that it's dog whistle. It's trying to...
In terms of the language, I said I would return to it. Diane Abbott, Labour MP on Newscast, said that the speech, this was the speech to the CBI about weaning the British economy off its immigration dependency, was dog whistle politics that sounded like the Home Secretary Suella Braverman. Do you agree?
And, you know, I agree with that. I think it is dog whistle, you know, talking about weaning people off immigration. What's that about? You know, even Lisa Nandy's comment, I'd argue, it's pretty dog whistle, saying, like, EU workers have taken opportunities from young Brits. Like, what is going on here?
I think she's right that it's dog whistle. It's trying to say, look, we're going to be tough. And actually, when Lisa explained it, she said, look, you know, we are going to still need lots of immigration because we are going to have these shortages within the economy. And you can't train people overnight. You know, we've got, I think, 40,000 nurse shortages. Even if we put more resources into that now, that's another 2 years before you've got a fully trained nurse.
And, you know, Keir Starmer talked about we have 7,500 nurses or students going into training to become a nurse. Like, cool, mate, the shortage is 40,000. So where are you going to magic 33,000 nurses from? Where are you going to magic them up from? Like, what? Like, guys, like, this is what I mean. Like, you know, I mean to Labour because I care. I genuinely care. Like, you can't be pushing this dog whistle nonsense. Like, you know, I would never throw another minority on the bus. And people can argue the language is clumsy, etc. But words have consequences, people. You know, I'm not going to at the people who claim the words are clumsy, etc. But come on now. Like, let's be honest here. This is more than just a bit clumsy. This is a concerted effort by the Labour Party, I think, to throw EU workers under the bus, to throw foreigners under the bus. I'll be honest here. You know, trying to appeal to people saying, oh, we can train British people to do these jobs. You know, we don't need foreigners, and we're actually going to do the funding, unlike the Tories. I mean, the argument she used was incredibly painful. And, you know, I think Keir Starmer was dishonest during his leadership campaign. It was a classic American pivot, guys. You know, and they argue, oh, things have changed. What's changed? What has changed? You know, he can even argue, look, I support freedom of movement, but we can't implement it because it's going to have to go through negotiations, which will take a long time. So what we really want to do is get certain agreements with the EU so that we can start boosting our economy and doing more trade with our nearest neighbours. Even Jeremy Hunt said himself, we should be looking to remove as many barriers as we can with our nearest trading partners. The Labour Party are actually going to do that, unlike the Conservative Party, who are still stuck in their war of how, you know, are we pro-EU or not? Are we pro-business or not? You know, these are the arguments the Labour Party could be using. Instead, they've got, you know, stupid amounts of xenophobia, talking about how EU healthcare workers have taken opportunities from young British kids. God damn, this is the state of this party. How long is this video going on for? Like almost 20 minutes. I'm gonna cut the video here. I'm just, you know, I only watched, like I said, I watched about 2/3 of this episode. God, I don't know. Just stop it, guys. Get some help. Honestly, get some help. Stop throwing minorities under the bus. Stop it. You know, it's not the UKIP party. This is the Labour Party here. You're meant to be pro-workers. You're not meant to be pitting worker against worker. This is nonsense. Honestly, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.